My name is Robert. I've been a gravedigger for 17 years, and what I witnessed that Saturday in March made me question everything about love, betrayal, and dignity. I was finishing preparing the grave for Mr. Michael Harrison, 52 years old, businessman, when I saw her arriving, a woman in red in a sea of black. At that moment, I didn't yet know I was about to witness the most tense funeral of my entire career. This is a true story. Names have been changed out of respect for the families. It was a cloudy Saturday, one of those days that seemed custom-made for goodbyes. The cemetery was fuller than normal. Michael was well known in town, owner of 3 car dealerships, president of the Rotary Club, that kind of man that everyone knew. The widow, Mrs. Margaret, had arrived early. Elegant woman, about 50 years old, hair pulled back, impeccable black dress. She was accompanied by her 2 children, a young man about 25 years old and a girl in her early 20s. The whole family very composed, that rigid way of someone holding back pain with dignity. I was there, as always, discreet, coordinating everything with the funeral staff. I'd seen so many burials that I'd developed a kind of sixth sense for when something different was going to happen. And that day, the air was too heavy. The procession began normally. The priest talking about eternal life, friends making speeches about how Michael was a great man. Margaret cried silently, supported by her children. Everything was following the usual script, the one I'd seen hundreds of times before. The spring sun was trying to break through the clouds, creating that strange lighting that makes everything look like an old photograph. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with freshly turned earth, a smell I'd grown accustomed to over the years, but that still reminded me of the fragility of life. There were about 60 people there, friends from the business community, relatives, employees from the dealerships. I recognized some faces. The mayor was there, a few city councilmen, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Michael had been an important man in our small town. That's when I saw the black Mercedes parking at the cemetery entrance. From it descended a woman I estimated to be about 35 years old. Beautiful, red dress, red, at a funeral. High heels, sunglasses. She stopped for a second, looking at the group of people around the casket, took a deep breath, and started walking in our direction. I saw when one of Michael's friends recognized her. His face turned white. He nudged another, who nudged another. It was a domino effect of shocked looks. Whispers began to spread through the crowd like wildfire. The woman in red approached, about 10 feet from the casket, and stood there, arms crossed. She didn't say anything, just stood there. Her presence was like a stone thrown into still water, the ripples of discomfort spreading through the assembled mourners. I'd been doing this job long enough to recognize trouble when I saw it. My partner James looked at me with raised eyebrows. I just shook my head slightly, a signal we'd developed over years working together that meant stay alert, but don't intervene unless necessary. It was Margaret's eldest son, Thomas, who reacted first. "Ma'am, you're in the wrong place," he said, voice firm but controlled. She slowly removed her sunglasses and replied loud enough for everyone to hear. "I loved this man for 8 years. I have as much right to be here as anyone." People. The silence that fell was deafening. Even the birds stopped singing, I swear. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. You could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Some people looked down at their feet, embarrassed. Others stared openly, unable to look away from the unfolding drama. A few elderly ladies clutched their purses tighter, as if this breach of funeral etiquette might be somehow contagious. It was Margaret's eldest son, Thomas, who first reacted. Margaret, who until then had her back turned, slowly turned around. And what I saw on that woman's face was not surprise. It was recognition. She knew. She had always known. 8 years, Margaret repeated, with a calm that even gave me chills. 8 years? Only 8? How disappointing! I thought it was at least 10. The mistress blinked, confused. This wasn't the reaction she was expecting. The crowd seemed to lean in collectively, no one wanting to miss a single word of this exchange. Margaret took 2 steps toward her. You know what's funny, dear? I found out 5 years ago, and I chose to stay. You know why? The younger woman's carefully composed expression began to crack. Her red lipstick suddenly seemed too bright, too defiant against her paling face. She clutched her small black purse, a concession to funeral propriety that her dress was not, with white-knuckled fingers. Margaret's daughter, Emily, reached out to touch her mother's arm, but Margaret gently shook her head. This was something she needed to do, something she'd perhaps been preparing for 5 long years. I glanced at the priest. Father Andrews stood frozen, his Bible hanging loosely in his hands. In 30 years of conducting funerals, I doubt he'd ever seen anything like this. His mouth opened slightly, as if to intervene, but no words came out. The mistress didn't answer. No one was breathing. The moment stretched out, elastic and painful. Because I had 30 years of history with him, 30 years of building, a company that we built together, 2 children we raised, a real life with bills, with problems, with routine. And you had what? Romantic dinners? Expensive hotels? The version of him that didn't need to argue about money or wash dishes? Margaret's voice was getting louder, but still controlled, frighteningly controlled. It was the control of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, who'd played out every possible scenario during sleepless nights over the past 5 years. You came here for what? To cry? To make a scene? To show that you suffer too? The woman in red began to tremble. Tears streamed down her face, leaving tracks in her carefully applied makeup. I just wanted to say goodbye to him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then Margaret did something no one expected. She walked to the casket, took one of the white roses that were on top of it, came back, and handed it to the mistress. The gesture was so unexpected, so graceful, that several people gasped audibly. Then say goodbye, but then leave and build your own life. Don't be a footnote in another couple's story. Those words hung in the air like a benediction and a curse all at once. The simplicity of them, the dignity, it was more devastating than any scream or slap could have been. The woman in red took the rose with trembling hands, looked at the casket one last time, and walked away. Slowly, head down. Her high heels clicked against the cemetery path, each step echoing in the profound silence. I watched as she stopped at the gate, looked back, and threw the rose on the ground before getting in her car and driving away. The Mercedes engine roared to life, too loud, too aggressive for the solemn setting, and then she was gone, leaving only tire marks and a dropped rose as evidence she'd ever been there. The burial continued in absolute silence. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to react. Thomas and Emily stood closer to their mother now, a protective wall of solidarity. Margaret's face was composed, almost serene, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She'd said her piece, she'd maintained her dignity, and in doing so, she'd somehow reclaimed something that had been stolen from her 5 years ago. As they lowered Michael Harrison's casket into the ground, I couldn't help but think about the secrets it would take with it. Had Michael loved both women? Had he been torn between 2 lives? Or had he simply been selfish? We'd never know now. When everyone left and only my assistant and I remained to close the grave, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had witnessed. You know what marked me the most? It wasn't the courage of the mistress in showing up. It wasn't Margaret's anger or humiliation. It was that calm, that acceptance, that dignity of someone who had already cried all their tears in private years ago and now just wanted to close a chapter. I've been doing this job for nearly 2 decades, and I've learned that funerals reveal truth like nothing else. When someone dies, all the pretenses fall away. Families that pretended to be close show their cracks. Secrets that were carefully guarded come spilling out. Love that seemed eternal reveals itself to be conditional. But I'd never seen someone handle betrayal with such composure. Margaret could have screamed, could have had the woman removed, could have let her pain show in front of everyone. Instead, she chose dignity. Days later, while cleaning the area, I found the red rose wilting near the gate. Someone had stepped on it. Its petals were crushed into the dirt, barely recognizable as the symbol of love and passion it had once been. I picked it up and threw it away, wondering if the woman in red had driven home crying or if she'd felt relief at finally being able to acknowledge her grief publicly. In this work, we learn that people keep more secrets than graves keep bodies, and that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't violence or a scandal. It's simply maintaining dignity when everything around you crumbles. I think about Michael Harrison sometimes when I'm preparing other graves. Did he realize what he was doing to his family? Did he justify it to himself somehow? Or did he live in that common state of denial, thinking he could have it all without consequences? And I think about Margaret, going home that night to an empty house, empty now in a way it hadn't been even when Michael was alive but with someone else. Did she feel victorious, sad, relieved? Probably all of those things and more. The woman in red remains a mystery to me. I never saw her again. Did she take Margaret's advice? Did she build her own life, find her own love, become someone's first choice instead of someone's secret? I hope so. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm a gravedigger for almost 2 decades, and unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you see it, I have hundreds of stories like this one. Every grave has a story, and some of those stories deserve to be told. If you want to hear more real accounts from behind the scenes of cemeteries, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Leave in the comments, do you think Margaret acted correctly? Would you have the same posture? What would you have done in her place? Until the next story, and remember, life is too short to be lived in lies. Death has a way of revealing what life tried to hide, and in my line of work, I've become a reluctant witness to humanity's greatest dramas, played out in the one place where pretense becomes impossible, where truth is the only currency that matters. The grave I closed that day holds a man who lived 2 lives. But the real story isn't buried 6 feet under. It's in the woman who chose dignity over drama, forgiveness over fury, and grace over grudges. That's the story I'll remember long after the grass has grown over Michael Harrison's grave.